People are trying.
Hello everybody and welcome. My name's Sharon Ruston and I'm a co-investigator on the Future of Human Reproduction project and the literature strand lead within it. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. What's literature got to do with it? How literature shapes our view of reproductive technology. We have Zinzi to thank for the Tina Turner reference in the title of the webinar, and I hope that song will be with you now for the rest of the day, as it has been with me since we've been organising this. Thanks to Zinzi as well for generally doing the organisation. So the webinar will last approximately 45 to 60 minutes. We're going to begin shortly. We'll aim to finish on time so that you can get on with your day. And we should mention that the webinar was made possible with funding from the Wellcome Trust. And before we begin, just a couple of reminders. So it's being recorded. This webinar is being recorded and a recording will be shared after the event. Participant mics and cameras are turned off, but you can use the chat and the Q&A function. And please do comment and ask questions. Zinzi is going to be monitoring the chat. Please don't be shy because we'd love to hear from you. We'd like to feel as if we are talking to someone, obviously. And there will be a dedicated Q&A session when Georgia and I are going to have a quick chat, and then there'll be like time for Q&A afterwards. But you can ask questions in the chat or the Q&A anytime, and then we'll come to them after we've had our own chat. So I am Sharon Ruston. I'm a professor in English literature at Lancaster. I've been a professor 17 years, 12 of them at Lancaster. And I'm interested in the relationships between literature, science and medicine. My most recent book was The Science of Life and Death in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a novel that does feature quite an amazing technology of reproduction, albeit not one that I hope that we're going to be investigating anytime soon. And I've just finished a project that was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, where we crowdsourced transcriptions of 19th century chemists' notebooks called Humphrey Davy, the Davy lamp fame. Davy wrote poetry in his notebooks as well as doing chemical experiments. And I'm particularly interested in him because he was a great inspiration for Shelley's character of Victor Frankenstein. So it all seems to come back to that for me. And Georgia, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, so I'm Georgia. I'm Georgia Walton. I'm Research Associate in English Literature on the Future of Human Reproduction project. I'm a specialist in American literature and culture from the 19th century to the present, and I'm kind of broadly interested in thinking about embodiment and sensation, thinking about how literature imagines the future, either directly or kind of indirectly through a sort of utopian imagination, and kind of the relationships between technological change and representation, like how the novel form, for example, might change in relation to technological development. I'm currently writing a monograph that's based on my doctoral research, which is called 19th Century Legacies in Contemporary US Literature, A New American Renaissance, which is forthcoming with Edinburgh University Press.
And it has been lovely to work with you, Georgia, over these last, has it been like 18 months or more, a bit more than that?
Yes, 18 months that I've been on the project, I think, yeah.
It's been really good. So yeah, the Future of Human Reproduction project, which we have been working on, has developed new methods, research agendas and interdisciplinary ways of working to try to tackle the conceptual and ethical implications of a range of future reproductive scenarios, some of which are already technologically possible now, or which will be very soon. Georgia, would you tell us about the different technologies then that we've been looking at?
Yeah, so the project focuses on 3 technologies. The first of these is ectogenesis, which is also sometimes called ectogestation or extracorporeal gestation, which is artificial womb technology, which is a sort of more kind of lay understanding of what the technology does. So there are several teams working on platforms based on this idea across the world. Most notably, in 2017, a team of scientists in Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital there announced the development of the biobag, which is a technology that kind of closely reproduces the conditions of the womb. And that team have successfully gestated lamb fetuses for 4 weeks and are now seeking approval for human trials. As it's currently being developed, this technology is intended as a kind of improvement on NICU, on neonatal care for premature infants, but people kind of speculate about how it might kind of has a broader potential in that it could completely change the way we think about pregnancy. The second technology is IVG, so that's in vitro derived gametes, which are egg and sperm cells created in a laboratory by transforming and kind of reprogramming other cells, such as stem cells or skin cells, to become egg and sperm cells. So these altered egg and sperm cells can then be used to create embryos. So there are kind of numerous applications or kind of possibilities that could be generated from this. Probably one of the main ones is that it would allow same-sex couples to have children that they were both genetically related to. It would allow transgender women to contribute eggs and transgender men to contribute sperm. It would also kind of lengthen the age at which women could reproduce, kind of lengthen reproductive age. And there's also the possibility that the technology could lead to multiplex genetic parenting, which is when a child has more than 2 genetic parents. The third technology that the project focuses on is genome editing, which is kind of genetic engineering that enables scientists to alter DNA. There's been lots of kind of variations of this, but a major breakthrough came in the 1970s. A major breakthrough came in 2012 with the introduction of CRISPR-Cas9. And this allows a sort of snipping and kind of microsurgery on DNA, which could lead potentially to the ability to remove genes that cause inheritable diseases and other kinds of conditions.
Thank you. Mind-blowing stuff, really, and we've both learned quite a lot, haven't we, in this time about kind of the science of the things that can be done and are being done, and that's all been quite amazing. So what we've been doing, Georgia and I have been doing on the project, and I guess all of us, so we very early on realised that the whole group liked reading books, and so that seemed to be a kind of bridge between us. And so we have regularly met up to discuss books like novels, literary theory, short stories, excerpts from books from the late 19th century today that had some relation to the project's topics. Georgia and I would set, or I suppose, would set questions in advance, asking people to think about the texts in relation to particularly their disciplines that they. So we're a project that's got 9 different disciplines, I think. Contributing to it. So we have lawyers and child psychologists and linguistics and philosophers, bioethics, and speculative design. And so we kind of asked people to think particularly about the text in relation to their own discipline, and all of the texts had some connection to the subjects that we were thinking about anyway. It's kind of like the best ever class you'd ever run at university. Because everyone's read everything that you asked them to read. They've all done the work in advance, and you have a really good conversation with like some of the best people in their field. So it's kind of both really scary, but also really very rewarding as well. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and maybe slightly better than sometimes might be the case in university, where students might not have quite read all the text, especially if it's so long, or done all the work in advance. So it's been really lovely. So we've regularly done that. That's been like working all the way through it. We've also had an online symposium where we had external speakers come to speak to us about literature and reproductive technologies, and we've invited some English literature scholars to run workshops with us. So Claire Barker came from Leeds to do a session on disability studies. Sarah Wasson did a session on late 19th century stories. And recently, Christy Oliver Hobley came to discuss John Wyndham's Midwich Cuckoos. And we've had a collaborator scheme. So we had a couple of collaborators that were particularly within English literature. Jerome de Groot and Keisha Thompson put on a play called The Bell Curve in Manchester about genetic modification. And Anna McFarlane, who's now at Glasgow, came and gave a talk and a workshop on her latest research and ran a conference called Reproduction and Speculative Cultures. We've been going to each other's conferences. So I took them all to the British Society for Literature and Science conference in Birmingham. And we've got two panels at the same conference this year, which is being held in Lancaster. And I guess our kind of crowning culmination thing is that we're putting together a topic collection for the BMJ Journal Medical Humanities, where everyone's thinking about a literary text, or a text to do with language, I suppose, as well. And we've kind of collaborated with other people. So I'm writing an article with a lawyer about a novel. Steve Wilkinson, RPI, who's a philosopher, is writing with Kirsty Dunn, who's a child psychologist. Nicola Williams, another philosopher, is writing with Laura O'Donovan, who's another lawyer. And we have other combinations and collaborations in the articles that have been developed. So yes, Georgia, can you say something about the kinds of books that we've read along the way?
Yeah, so I think we've mainly focused on novels. So I think we would kind of have a sort of aim to do some poetry. That hasn't quite happened yet. And I think initially the books that were read were novels that dealt with the technologies more directly. So ones where the authors are kind of really inspired by current technological kind of experiments and thinking of what the implications those might be for the future. So examples of novels like that are Anne Charnock's Dreams Before the Start of Time and Helen Sedgwick's The Growing Season. And then I think we've moved kind of a bit beyond, like moved away from that a little bit more recently and read books that are sort of more tangential. So kind of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, which imagines gene editing, but it's gene editing by aliens. So it's quite far from something that we think will actually happen. And then also Maggie Nelson's memoir, The Argonauts, which doesn't really focus on technology, but it's kind of about different forms of families and different and kind of queer families and queering motherhood and parenthood. And many others that I'm sure we'll talk about more.
Yeah, I mean, there's been loads, and we actually have done a lot, and even then, there's loads more that we could do, and it's kind of always quite hard to think. For the past year, we've been thinking, what can we still fit in to do, and it's going to be sad if we don't get it all done, which we won't. Why do you think then that literature's been good for the project, Georgia?
I think kind of like I think you sort of touched on it earlier, but I think the main thing is kind of bringing lots of people together and using it as this kind of discussion tool. Novels are really great because they have lots of different things at play at once. So they kind of speak to emotions, to politics, social systems, relational dynamics. So there's sort of always something for like someone's area of expertise to kind of latch onto. And yeah, they kind of create a kind of common language and sort of provide this like route through the technology. If I had to pick a particular example of a book that I think is really useful for that, I'd say Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy. Because it's such a kind of rich, kind of involved, kind of developed world, and I like it really shows all the different layers of society and kind of how that operates. So I think that's really been really useful. What were your favourite sessions, do you think, Sharon?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think even when you've got a novel, even we've done some films as well, I realise, which we haven't mentioned, and but when you do have a text that you've all looked at and people everyone's got an opinion about it, and that's quite useful, even if people haven't enjoyed it. So that's been also good. So yeah, I think I'm going to go back to like a really early one, which was Helen Sedgwick's The Growing Season, just because it really thought through the practicalities of artificial wombs or whatever you want, whatever word you want to use for it. They were kind of imagined as pouches that people would wear, and it really imagined a kind of world where that was the norm. Um, it had something for everyone. So like it had something about the kind of what was the ideal environment for the fetus. And so Kirsty, I think, kind of who's our lecturer in child psychology, that was good for her. But it had stuff about law, it had stuff about, all kinds of things. And I enjoyed it because I put everyone into two groups, and they had to come up with arguments for and against why the pouch would be a good or bad thing, and that was loads of fun. And kind of had people moving between each other and arguing against each other, which was really interesting. It's always the best thing in a class is when people stop just answering you, the tutor who's asked the questions, and they start responding to each other. I always feel like that's when you've done a good thing, and that happened then. It's happened in other ones as well. What do you
Yeah,
think was the best?
I think the session on Nelson was really good because even
Yeah,
though it wasn't dealing with the technology directly, I think there's it kind of speaks to so many different issues that lots of like people could bring in lots of different things. I think also it's quite for me, I really liked it because it's like a book that's really engaged with literary theory, and so that it was a really nice way of bringing some of that in as well. And I also recently really enjoyed Christie's session that he did on the Midwich Cuckoos. I
yeah,
think partly maybe because we opened it out to people outside of the group, and so that was really
yeah.
nice. We got some new perspectives in, and different people kind of and got to share some of what we'd learned, but also hear from other people.
Yeah, and it's just a joy, isn't it? It's just a privilege and a joy to be sitting there talking about a book, I think often.
Definitely.
What specific projects do you think we bring to what specific perspectives do you think we bring to the project as literary experts?
I think literary and well, cultural studies more broadly are kind of like really good at showing kind of understanding how narrative patterns kind of function across society, and then how that might also lead to the development of certain technologies, as well as kind of just not. I think we talk a lot on the project about how the public will respond to these, and kind of what people will think about them, how to kind of, and sometimes it's a sort of question of how to navigate that, how to kind of prepare people for technologies that they might be resistant to. But I think because, and especially because literary studies is often quite historical and kind of looks back, kind of tracing a pattern and seeing how those narratives kind of develop, which also leads to the development of certain technologies that maybe wouldn't be developed if we had a different narrative. So for me, that's kind of one of the things it really brings to the project, I think. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those old-fashioned historical literary types, aren't I? So I guess for me, one of the things that was quite eye-opening was so to be able to show people the kind of how we approach literature and what we do with it. And I thought that was quite interesting. And so, I did some real kind of close reading stuff with people early on, and there was some quite interesting kind of results there because one of the lawyers, Sarah, mentioned that she said that it's always quite difficult for lawyers to articulate their methodology, which I think actually is quite difficult for us sometimes to articulate our methodologies as well. And she thought that close reading really kind of offered something there because it helped. And it's kind of because when we looked at kind of, I read some stuff that she'd written and you can see the kind of same techniques at play. So I guess that was a thing, given that we're kind of creating new interdisciplinary methods, we found a method that was kind of shared across different disciplines that maybe hadn't been thought of in or kind of labeled the way that we label it, I suppose, as well. Um, and I guess the other thing is that just thinking of a literary text as a cultural artifact is something that we bring to the project, and thinking about its construction and the way that it's those kind of things I think is something that um, I don't know if people realise so much as they and have found hopefully useful in some of the other things that they've written. Why is it so good for the topic, do you think, Georgia?
Well, I think specific as like most of the texts we've read have been sci-fi or speculative fiction. So and obviously all the kind of technology areas we're looking at are in development and either aren't widely or at all available. So all our approaches are inherently speculative. Everything we're doing is kind of looking forward and kind of trying to work out what might happen. So science fiction and speculative fiction are kind of invaluable for that. Obviously, you have a kind of ready-made scenarios and kind of worlds mapped out for you by people that are much better at doing it than I am, certainly. So that kind of inherent speculative nature of the project. And then obviously the kind of theory around science fiction is really helpful for kind of unpicking the ways in which we think about the future and what that might mean, and then how that kind of relates to the present. I get like, I also kind of, I think colleagues in kind of other disciplines have talked about how they use kind of scenarios or thought experiments to imagine like a legal response or an ethical response to a particular situation, and that literary texts kind of provide a much richer version of that, kind of much more kind of widely imagined with more different elements at play. And they kind of, you know, they kind of independent, like raise lots of different questions, and particularly the ones that we're looking at, which are kind of legal, social, and ethical issues. Which of those issues do you think literature has helped raise for you in this project, Sharon?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can't divorce literature from those issues. Because I think of literature as a kind of product of history, and I guess so. I think of, you know, that's where that is for me. So I feel like we've always talked about those things. Like we've never talked about literature without those things being involved. But perhaps the one text that stands out for me because because it's the one that Sarah and I are writing about, particularly for the journal, is Mendel's Dwarf by Simon Mauer. And so it features a protagonist who's a geneticist who also has achondroplasia. Um, and I shouldn't give any spoilers, but he does various things that explore the ethical issues of genetic modification, and really gets to the heart of kind of whether you should or shouldn't do certain things and what the consequences are, particularly from the perspective of someone who has this achondroplasia. So that was, I guess, if I had to pick one out, that would be it for me. What about for you? Is there one text that you think has been particularly useful that way?
I think, well, thinking, I mean, yeah, as you say, they all raise legal, social, and ethical issues, but some of them do it in a kind of more direct way. So I suppose Anne Charnock's Dreams Before the Start of Time kind of shows how increased technology around gestation and pregnancy might lead to greater surveillance of pregnant people. And The Growing Season kind of analyzes it, or shows how quality and safety could be compromised if technological change is like always bound up with corporations and kind of private interests. And it kind of creates this sort of two-tier kind of class system of people who can afford the technology and people who can't. So yeah, those ones, I suppose. But I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, Nelson and the Midwich Cuckoos, the way we read that definitely kind of raised issues of queer parentage and kind of queer futures, that, you know, all come under that banner of social issues. So I mean, obviously we need what am I saying? We've talked a lot about the kind of positive things that literature's brought, and like how it helps towards an interdisciplinary project. But what do you think some of the challenges might be of working interdiscipline in this way, and then also like using literature in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because so we came together with all these different disciplines, and also it was a weird time because we met first of all just before the pandemic, but we'd only met like really briefly a couple of times before the pandemic, and then we wrote the proposal to kind of online, and and then when we met up again, you know, it was all quite exciting, but we had to learn to sort of work together, and we had this really great, like I reckon about a year at first, where we kind of really sort of had to find out about each other and each other's disciplines. So we had these kind of what do I do sessions where we would kind of present. It's really, I mean, it was some of the best times because it was like it's work, but it's also, you know, we love finding out new things, don't we, as academics, I suppose. So yeah, you kind of so you would present, but you'd also we read an article of each other's. So, and those kinds of things, it's really good. We had to kind of establish a new safe space where were able, you felt like you got on and you could be honest with each other to the point that you could say, I just don't understand what you're talking about. I don't, you know, you're using a word that I wouldn't use in that way, and I don't understand the way that you're using it. So you had to kind of, I think that that's a real challenge, is you have to create an environment where people kind of get on, I suppose, as well. Um, yeah, and then, you know, we've had to learn to write together for the journal, um, and kind of establish non-hierarchical relationships between the disciplines, which can be tricky at times. You had to acquire new skills, such as like learning from each other, reflecting on your own discipline, celebrating differences between you. There's so often that we'll just say, well, that's the way it is in my discipline, and you have to kind of both be aware of that and think beyond it as well. Um, and enjoy kind of being creative and innovative outside of your disciplinary boundaries too. Do you have anything you want to add there, Georgia?
I suppose one of the challenges for me is I think I thought before I did this project that English was like always interdisciplinary because it's like always interested in other subjects, and it kind of picks, like, I don't know, you kind of take up lots of different things, and kind of literary scholars kind of move between different things, but, you know, maybe stay in the same historical period or something, or the same nation. Um, but I think what I've kind of like the main barrier for me in kind of working at the moment in like working on the project and kind of writing with other people is that we're kind of essentially always mainly interested in the text, and sometimes that's then quite difficult to bring into conversation with something else. If we're kind of always interested in representation of form and the text itself, how then do we move beyond that, or do it alongside the questions of other disciplines, and kind of and think about other things in relation to that? So yeah, that's the main problem for me. And yeah, I think definitely like moving from kind of discussing and learning about other people's work to then like actually trying to produce work together is like where the
Yeah.
real challenge is.
Yeah, I remember Eleanor Semino, one of the co-authors, say that was the moment when you'd find the difficulty. I guess, and like, you know, for all that we've said about the wonderful things that literature does and the kind of legal, social, ethical issues it raises, um, I think sometimes we're always having to say to people, this is a novel, you know, and it has its own rules, and it has its own genre, and you know, we're not necessarily as as interested or invested in how accurate a novel is to the world today. We're kind of interested in it and how it works as a novel, and I guess that's always that's been a sort of difference sometimes. Um, and also, I think the other thing is like the thing, you know, I kind of was really adamant at the beginning that we didn't call our meetings to talk about the books book club, but they're called book club anyway. And that was partly because I didn't want people to think that all we do is all that we do is like a book club, because I feel like it's more than that, and we have you know, we've studied for years to become the people that we are, and we've got qualifications, and there's, you know, there's a language and a terminology and a kind of and a rigor to what we do. So I guess that's always that's something you kind of want to be accessible, but you want to also say, but it is also hard, you know, as well. So that's a tricky line sometimes to have. We have rambled on for 30 minutes now. I wonder whether there are any questions that anyone's asked. Zinzi, are you there? Have you been keeping an eye on the chat?
I'm here, and yes, I have been keeping an eye on the chat. And there was no rambling. It's all been very interesting. We've got 3 questions to begin with, so I'll just take them in the turn that they've been put forward. So open to both of you to respond to. Would you say that writers are mainly critical, resistant, or warning about the potentiality of these technologies? Are there any authors or texts that are broadly celebratory?
I feel like they are generally warning. Is that what you would agree? I mean, what's interesting is that even something like the growing season, for example, or Genes Before the Start of Time, even if you think that it's a question about whether they're optimistic or not, because I think that even if they are generally warning about things, they are thinking through at such a detailed level that kind of whether it's a warning or not doesn't really matter. So even, but then, I mean, other things are more obviously warning. I think, Margaret Atwood is perhaps one there that you'd kind of, there's not a lot of that's good to be found in the world that she's created in that trilogy, I don't think. What do you think, Georgia?
No, but I suppose, well, with the Atwood and with the growing season, both of them, I think they're not it's not the technology necessarily, maybe more in the Atwood one that is being critiqued, but rather because there is like definitely the beginning of the growing season, it's all this sort of like rosy kind of you can have your ecto pouch pod thing at home, and like both partners can kind of hold it, and it kind of has all these positive benefits. But the negative aspect in that, and in Atwood, I think Atwood's novel as well, is really come from a kind of corporate kind of control of the technology, and that arena sort of taking over everything. And actually, well, I suppose Butler is less it's less it's less grounded in the real world because it's after a kind of nuclear apocalypse and an alien invasion. But I think it's not thinking about being critical or positive about technology, but the kind of some of the possibilities of the alien kind of manipulation are like mimic kind of genetic engineering technology. So, and I think there are positives to be had in that as well, and a lot of that is about survival and kind of adaptation, like kind of poor Lilith, the protagonist of those novels, kind of just sort of gets on with it and kind of carries on, and like is seen as a traitor by some of the other humans for doing that. But there is a sense of kind of just sort of living with it, I suppose. I don't know if that's positive, but it's not wholly negative.
Yeah, and I think that just to come back to the growing season again, like that, when I said about there was a whole load of reasons why the pouch was a good thing, wasn't there? I mean, like, in terms of women's careers and kind of being able to be pregnant, but still kind of, do everything else in life and all sorts of things, kind of, and we had a whole discussion about, all the problems that pregnancy can bring and medical problems, things like that. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't just it's never, well, it hasn't been clear cut, has it? The people will investigate the positives as well as the negatives.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I will actually take this opportunity because there are a couple of more questions coming in. But if people can think of some broadly celebratory texts, then we probably want to see them in the chat.
Yeah.
So if you get your thinking hats on as an audience, that would be fantastic. And we'll give Georgia and Sharon a bit of time to think of any as well. And I think it's an interesting reflection, because what I'm also hearing from your response to that is there's good and bad, and it's also how it's interpreted by the reader. So that's perhaps more realistic of the world we're in as well. Like it's not all good, it's not all bad. But there we go. Moving on to our next question. And again, open to you both. Are you doing any work in the project which goes out beyond the texts themselves? For example, talking to SFF authors, so science fiction fantasy authors, about how they are considering these technologies and issues when writing these kinds of works, and/or talking to readers and fans about the reception of these works and how it shapes perceptions to the field? So I guess a broad question there about engagement. So what was the approach there? If one of you wants to take that, please.
We haven't really done this, have we? I mean, we've got some plans to talk to one of the authors that I don't think I should say about it because it's not been confirmed, but but we are hoping to do that. And I think probably Anna McFarlane kind of is the closest to this, isn't she? In a way that she's been interested in. So at her conference, Heather Latimer talked about fans and how people had read stuff, and that was really interesting about yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really good plenary that she gave to that conference, but we haven't done a lot of this, I have to admit. And it's definitely a area that I'd be interested in, and that we could take it in if we were to do more. It's been more of a difficulty just trying to fit in what we've done. You know, it kind of feels like it's gone very quickly, and we've done a lot, but then we still haven't. There still would have been so much that we would have liked to have done as well, I think.
You did talk to Simon Mauer.
Oh, I
I'm
did.
not quite sure how you say that, but you did interview him.
Mauer, yeah, I did. We had an interview with him. I mean, he's not a science fiction writer, yeah, but no, he wrote Mendel's Dwarf, and that was really interesting. And Sarah and I got to ask him lots of questions, and then we put the transcript up on the blog. So that, yeah, I mean, that's the first time I've ever talked to an author, because the work I do is on people who've been dead for 200 years, so I've never spoken to an author, and I guess like it's kind of a bit of an alien idea to me in a way, and not something I immediately think of. But yeah, that was interesting, because I guess for me, I'd be like, you know, I could talk to an author, but then I could be like, well, that might be what you think, but this is what I think, and it could be completely different. But it's still, yeah, it's an area that I'd be interested in.
I think it's interesting because he had written a book on Mendel, on Gregor Mendel, who developed some of the science in the 19th century. So like, and that is the case with other. So is it Baby X, or there's a novel called Baby X that I think the person that wrote that also like has like a degree in bioethics. So there's a sort of trend of people who have expertise from other areas and bringing it in to write a novel about the technologies.
Yeah, he was a biology teacher.
And then I suppose we haven't done that kind of work on the fans and kind of people reading them, but we have in other work that people have been doing on the project. So we looked at some YouTube videos, and there's been some linguistics work on the comments on those YouTube videos that kind of one of the videos has like a fictionalized representation of an artificial womb facility, and what we noticed in those was that everyone just references literary texts and films. So there's just like loads of references to Brave New World, to Star Wars, and to The Matrix. So yeah, so there's like the beginning of that work, that it's like people use these texts to think about these issues all the time. But yeah, no, it's not really been, we haven't done anything more with that yet.
But that article is coming out hopefully quite soon with the Medical Humanities Journal. Alex Crendall and Mike Ryder, who looked at that stuff. Yeah, that is right. They are. That is interesting. It's about kind of real people's responses to something and how they invoke literary text in those responses. I can't remember everything we've done is one of the problems.
It's done so much, and I guess I was going to ask you as well, just off the back of that previous question, is well, what would you like to have spent more time on? So maybe there's like a top 3 that you guys might have, and how would that further the research of the team? You know, what would you like to have spent more time doing on new things?
I think, I mean, it's kind of a bit crazy that we haven't ever done Frankenstein, and I think it was like I felt a bit embarrassed because I was, you know, I felt like I bang on about it all the time, but then it kind of feels crazy that we haven't done that. It is such an text in lots of ways, I think, and I think that would. It was a bit of an omission. I think, you know, if we still did get a chance, that would be a good thing to do. I quite regret that we haven't done any poetry, because I kind of, that, you know, really is one of my areas, and one of the distinctive things about literature that would have been good. But then I'm really glad we did literary theory, for example. I don't think we would have done that without you coming on board, Georgia.
Yeah, I think the poetry, because it's also where a lot of like the methodological approaches come from, is like close reading practices kind of really develop poetry, don't they? So yeah, I think it would have been nice. It's quite hard hard to find things that are really, really relevant, though, I think.
Yeah.
So, and any of the engagements, so those were the texts, and there was the element of engagement that one of the pupils was talking about. Anything more you'd like to do there in regards to exercises?
What was that? Sorry, Cindy, I didn't.
You mean outside the project, like?
So within the project, but perhaps engagement.
With real people?
Yes.
Yes.
Not just with the books.
With real people.
So
Well,
the
yes.
person asking the question was asking about have you talked to different authors or engaged with readers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do more of that. And I love engagement stuff and meeting people who enjoy reading, and I think that's always a joy. And yeah, we didn't have any kind of impact imperative, I guess, with this project, but I do a lot of that work. And I mean, one of the things I've most loved is meeting the people who have been doing the transcriptions for the Davy project. And I guess it kind of makes it all sort of meaningful in lots of ways, is to kind of meet real people who are interested in this stuff and find out why it's of interest to them. And yeah, and I think that is a whole area that could have been explored, about kind of, which, I mean, we're going to do a little bit of it again, not really outside the project, but at the milestone event, aren't we? Hopefully, we'll kind of be talking to more people than just us in June, and kind of, I think Georgia and I might have some excerpts and kind of see how people respond to reading about reproductive technologies in various literary texts.
Thank you. I'll move us on to the next question because I'm mindful of the time, if I may. And this is says, did literature help with the challenge of creating an environment where people get on? How else has literature helped the research project beyond group dynamics?
I really think it did. I really think it brought us together, and was a kind of like, I mean, as been said already, it kind of gave us a common language, and a kind of bridge between it, like, because I think everyone just enjoyed reading novels. I think the problem came a little bit when some of the things that we read weren't as kind of enjoyable, and it became more like work. It's one of the problems, perhaps, as we went on. But I think for most people, the idea of, who are not us, the idea of reading a novel for work was quite a novelty. So it's people really excited about doing that. So yeah, I think that it was an enjoyable aspect of work, that people got on with.
I think even when everyone hates the book, that's quite good for group. I always think that in a seminar, if all the students like hate it, then they like kind of bond over hating it and talk about why they hated it, which is easier than talking about why you like things sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the next question, thank you for that, is have many of the books you've read engaged with issues around climate crisis and how they intersect with reproduction? I'll just give you a moment to have a think.
Well, I think the Atwood is the most obvious one.
I mean, I think this is something that maybe we need to work on in the project more generally, and kind of it, like, because for me, I did a project before this that really looked at the relationships between environmental activism and the kind of feminist protests and how it uses motherhood to articulate a kind of environmental message. So I would like to develop that. And in the paper I'm giving at BSLS this year, I'm going to talk about contemporary texts that engage with Frankenstein, so that like we get the Frankenstein in somehow. But because there's about to be like 5 films like coming out like very soon, or that all engage with Frankenstein, and my argument is that is a kind of symptom of like thinking about a kind of reproductive anxiety around climate change, but also around reproductive technology. But yeah, absolutely, Margaret Atwood is probably the best one, where it shows technological process kind of going hand in hand with environmental degradation. But yeah, no, I mean, it's not. I think it could be bigger, definitely, and should be.
A question from your PI. Have you found out anything surprising about other academic disciplines, methods, and approaches?
Yeah, loads. I mean, I didn't know anything about any of them before, and it's funny, isn't it, how kind of happy you are to sort of go along not knowing about other disciplines, and also having kind of sort of stereotypical notions of other disciplines as well, which can be exploded when you actually start talking to people. I think that I mean, just thinking about Steve's philosophy kind of discipline, I'm just always really taken aback that Steve and Nicola will talk or write about how things should be, and I find that a word that we would never use in English literature, and how the world should be, and all that, and that's really interesting. Yeah, have you got anything, Georgia, that you can think of?
Yeah, I think my biggest surprise is that I think I kind of thought I understood what philosophy was from like a literary perspective. Like we do a lot, you know, we do a version of philosophy, and lots of the texts we look at are philosophical, but then kind of definitely more of a kind of continental philosophy. So then sort of like realizing that actually most of what, you know, academics working in universities do is an analytical philosophy is quite different. So that's probably the biggest thing for me.
And you've now taught with Steve, haven't you? You did a
we've taught together, taught on an MA module where we tried to bring some of those kind of analytical and like bioethics questions in conversation with the literary texts.
What did that look like? Sorry, just briefly. How did that go?
Yeah, I think they enjoyed it. We asked them all to, again, I think like kind of like Sharon was saying, there was a sort of novelty element of that they were like just quite pleased to be able to talk about literary texts that they'd read, because we asked them all to come in with examples of texts that had like changed their kind of philosophical view on something. So I think they really enjoyed that. And we looked at Kazuo Ishiguro's story Never Let Me Go, which is about clones that are raised to donate organs to people. So it raises lots of ethical questions. I mean, I think the slight problem with that novel is that no one would read it and think that this was, you know, it's so, I mean, I'm not sure anyone would think that you should do that anyway, but like, it, you know, it is so weighted towards thinking that these clones are human and that they, you know, have a kind of rich inner life that, you know, it's absolutely appalling to then steal all their organs for the benefit of somebody else. So I'm not sure it's quite, you know, I can't really imagine many people arguing the opposite. So I'm not sure it's that useful in that respect. But so yeah, I think we've done it twice now. I think it went okay.
I mean, it sounds great being asked to just share something that changed your view. That's a great discussion, full stop, right? We should do one. Right, we're moving on to the next question, and I think we've only got one or two more, unless people want to add some last minute ones, because we'll try and tie up just before the hour so people can get to their next sessions or work meetings. But it is from Beth. I'm interested in drama and script development. Have you seen anything good recently on TV, radio, or theatre that explores tech, ethics, and reproduction? So again, just take a minute.
I think we'd have to say the bell curve, wouldn't we? Keisha Thompson's bell curve, which we helped to put on in Manchester, but I think which is still being developed and will hopefully be seen again. And I can't really describe it. Can you remember, Georgia?
It's the substance of it is the substance though. That's about tech and the film. It's about a woman who's like applying to do a PhD or like applying for funding to develop CRISPR-Cas9 technology or a version of it. I can't remember exactly what part of like what she is hoping to aim, what she is particularly aiming for. But then it kind of involves it then sort of centers on like her relationship with her sister and her partner and their best friends, the partner and the sister, and then the sister has like a child with a genetic condition, and it sort of explores their kind of relational dynamics and how it relates to the technology, but it's also quite meta and has a sort of, you know, what does it mean to write a play about this subject element to it. I think, is that accurate?
It's very accurate.
From what I remember.
Than I would have done. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's really good. And I mean, and we have watched films as well, haven't we? We did the film of Never Let Me Go, and we did Boys from Brazil. Can't think there's anything else. But
Gattaca.
oh, Gattaca, of course, yeah. And then what about
and
the
Birth Rebirth.
yeah, I was going to say that one. That's that is that what you're talking about at BSLS partly?
Yeah. So that is a sort of it's Birth Rebirth. It didn't have like a huge release, but it came out a couple of years ago, and it's a Frankenstein-ish story, but very centered like in a hospital, and it's all kind of female main characters, and I think it's really good for thinking about reproductive technology and how it actually impacts people, but also kind of critiquing maybe a sort of selfish kind of selfish mother kind of, who cares about their child more than anyone else and anything else. Sort of the opposite of Frankenstein in that respect, I suppose. Like, it's the inverse of the scientist who rejects his creation, and it's more about like the desire to preserve that at any cost.
Mm-hmm. And someone's just mentioned Spliced, which we did watch as well, didn't we? Which it was horrible. I didn't really like watching that at all. We were hoping, because Anna McFarlane was hoping to show it on the Dukes, and then there was a problem that night and we couldn't show it. But and what did she show instead?
She didn't show anything because
there was nothing.
There was a problem with that.
There was a problem with it. Yeah, that's right.
Got cancelled.
Yeah, but we did. So, but I had watched Spliced at home in preparation, and it was But that's another one I think to add to the list, as Christina has mentioned there.
And just in the chat, just in case you haven't seen it, Naomi Jacobs from Imagination Lancaster, nice to you to join us. She's also put perhaps Orphan Black might count.
Oh yes,
This is a suggestion.
I watched that years ago. Can't remember.
Excellent. The final question for you today was actually, what films have you looked at? So you already answered it. Which is quite future thinking, so that's quite great. That's really good. And that's all the questions that we've got in the chat. I'll hand back over to Sharon and George in a moment, but I will say that this recording, this will be available as a recording, and we will respond to the questions as part of the write-up. But if you do have any questions that you would like to ask the team, you can email the Future of Human Reproduction at Lancaster email address that's available on the website. But back over to Sharon and Georgia, and thank you very much for answering those questions so eloquently.
Oh, thank you. Well, just to say thank you to everyone for coming, and we really appreciate you giving up your time. Yes, and get in touch with us if we can help at all. It's been a real privilege to be on the project and to work with Georgia and to work with everybody. So thank you. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, echo everything that Sharon says. And also if anyone has any great suggestions of things we haven't looked at, texts or films, please also send them. Right, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.